Thank you, David. I'm going to ask you to stick around for the round of discussions. Next talk is Dr. Mark Bober, who will talk about smart data collection from the field to the door.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Just want to start by saying, not a doctor. And although I would love to be one, and I'm very flattered to be here with all of you who are, I am not. I am a paramedic by trade, and my wife has a wonderful way of putting things in perspective. So on the way out the door, she basically said to me, hey, don't worry about it. It's not like they're brain surgeons. And I said, okay, maybe, maybe not. We'll see. But ultimately, I really do appreciate the fact that I'm here. And my hope is that perhaps I can offer a little bit of perspective that's different than the in-house perspective. So I am the director of the Emergency Medical Services for JFK Medical Center, come from the same institution as Dr. Strauss and Dr. Kermani, which is a great thing. A place that truly has invested and believed in EMS over the years, which is pretty fantastic from our perspective. No financial disclosures other than that. And ultimately, what I'm here to talk about is how to be smart in terms of data and in terms of goals and metrics, stroke care from the field to the door, and what some of those opportunities look like, how to triage some of those opportunities, how to select some data projects, and then ultimately how to maintain those gains. Those have all been very important for us. As Dr. Kermani and Dr. Strauss talked about, we were a community hospital that's now part of a 17-hospital network, and ultimately we were an EMS organization with a couple of advanced life support vehicles that now have specialty care transport vehicles, basic life support, advanced life support, and about 650 people within our department. So the question has become, how do we take what we've always done well at a very small scale and scale it up to a much larger health network? And that's really been the challenge for us over the past year to 2 years. Start by talking about smart data, and smart data ultimately has to relate back to the Six Sigma concepts of SMART goals. I don't advocate one process improvement methodology over another. However, I will say that process improvement methodology is incredibly important, especially when it comes to creating a scalable system and it comes to maintaining the gains as you implement change. So making sure that your goals, making sure that your data is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound is the way to truly scope things out to make sure that what you are doing is capable of meeting goals, capable of taking incremental, sometimes baby steps, and ultimately getting to where you need to go. I think we can all realize that if you try to bite off a bigger piece or the entire piece, it often becomes daunting and very, very difficult. And we find this in EMS regularly. And triage is one of the things that we do exceptionally well, because if you arrive at the scene of a mass casualty incident, you can't simply ask that there be more patients than there are. You need to categorize and qualify those patients. You need to triage those patients to make sure that you're treating the appropriate people in the appropriate time frames. And you need to take off small pieces and make sure that the steps that you're taking are manageable pieces. So that's something that's innate in what we do in EMS and in the pre-hospital system. Here's some examples of smart metrics. And obviously that top box is just kind of the template for how to do it. But making sure that you're using specific numbers, making sure that you're using specific time frames, and really spelling these things out. When it comes to scoping a project or scoping a data metric that you want to try and improve, these are pieces that have to be there from the word go, or else the scope gets very murky, you run the risk of creeping into different areas, and you can't keep your eye on the prize the way that you need to in order to take these steps in a timely fashion. So for us in our EMS system, we actually control a fair number of the patient access points, and for us, that's actually very helpful. I would ask you in your organization, do you have these kind of ties with EMS? Are you engaging and utilizing pre-hospital care to the fullest extent? Because ultimately what happens in the back of that ambulance, whether it's from the 911 arena or it's from the inter-facility arena, that's time before it hits your door to be accomplishing tasks and checking boxes before you actually start the clock. So that can really advance things that, sometimes it seems like those metrics and those intervals are incredibly compressed. And a lot of people are trying to accomplish a lot of things very quickly. Utilize your EMS, utilize your pre-hospital care. Try and check some of those boxes before you actually hit the door. So in our ED, which we are seamlessly integrated with, Stroke Team Alert is obviously a 24-hour thing at a comprehensive stroke center like ours. I'm not sure what that is. But we've gone a step further than a lot of places in regard to making sure that our inclusion criteria I'm not sure I can get that off the screen. making sure that our inclusion criteria go a little bit further than just simple face, arms, and speech. And at the bottom there, you can see that we include things like changes in vision, dizziness, ataxia, vertigo, coordination. We do a lot of training when it comes to this. And the goal is to make sure that the EMS providers have it sort of a little bit one step further than we would otherwise.
Can we fix the slides, please? He can control.
Can we advance the slides?
Well, it looks like it's going to stay there anyway. Okay.
Well, you have to can you close that window?
So just to keep going, ultimately, there are a number of different intervals within the emergency department and within the pre-hospital system that you can tackle. And the question becomes, how do we tackle those things? You know, how do we triage those things to be in the determination and in the order that we would like to? Because what we want to do is make sure that we're getting as much bang for our buck, and we're picking the projects that are going to matter the most. When it comes to pre-hospital care, when it comes to hospital care, when we're creating that map to try and determine where and what we need to tackle first, it's important to realize that our true north always has to be outstanding patient care and how we can actually affect the lives of our patients that come to see us and that count on us. So we've always kind of viewed our initiatives within that lens. And within EMS, obviously we've taken some massive steps forward. Thank you to whoever did that. Obviously we've taken some massive steps forward over the years. You know, it's not that long ago that I can remember sitting in the back of an ambulance and just sort of staring at a stroke patient and shaking my head. You know, obviously we did a blood sugar, obviously we did some stroke mimic rule out, but beyond that, there wasn't really much else to do for those patients. Now, from the second that we arrive to the second that we're arriving at the emergency department in preparation to go straight to CT, we have a massive amount of interventions that we can perform. Everything from better history to, you know, obviously ruling out novel anticoagulants and making sure we have a great, accurate history. Cincinnati Pre-Hospital has now kind of evolved into large vessel occlusion stroke scores as well. Obtaining and transmitting 12 leads to the emergency department to check that box before we get there. And then obviously making that appropriate notification on the way in the door. Incredibly important. So when it comes to present state process, we really do, as Dr. Kermani alluded to, use the Plan, Do, Check, Act methodology. And for that, things like stuff that's going on right now, you know, trying to essentially disassemble and reassemble the airplane mid-flight. But when it comes to new initiatives, we use DMAIC methodology, and that's define, measure, analyze, improve, and control. You know, evaluating how to better integrate the entire team, evaluating next steps. And ultimately, some of the data, as my previous speaker alluded to, does have to be pretty messy because you can't just sort of hit the timeout button and stop and then reset and start over. So when it comes to starting a new initiative or a new project, obviously taking the time to do that is a luxury. And sometimes we do have that in creation of new systems. But ultimately, choosing the methodology that works best for you, whether it be a Plan, Do, Check, Act, or a DMAIC, has to do with what step you are in the process, whether you're starting something completely new from scratch, or whether you're trying to evolve something that you're already working with. So those are just two of a number of methodologies that have been helpful to us over the years as well. Lastly, maintaining the gains, making sure that your metrics are visual, making sure that they're out there and that the people who are actually doing the work and are engaged understand what the results are and how that directly reflects and results in patient improvements. So things like posters, things like taking all of your information, creating graphical formats of representation of it, talking about the process beforehand, you know, creating fishbone diagrams to talk about the brainstorming process, creating process flow and swim lane diagrams to show multidisciplinary teams and how they interact. All that has been key to our success, and putting those goals front and center and displaying those metrics front and center have really helped us to maintain the gains over the years. So having said that, I hope that's just sort of a brief overview of what you can do as far as data collection and making sure that you are focused on taking the appropriate steps and not just sort of selecting processes at random, not just sort of trying to make improvements based on where the dart hits on the board, but ultimately triaging issues appropriately and taking the appropriate steps to correct things or improve care as we go. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. There is one more seat here.
So our final speaker for this session is Dr. Mehta, and he is presenting on data flow from LVO activation to vessel opening.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. So this is going to be a tour de force of data collection. I'm going to go pretty quickly in the interest of time, and I can share these slides with you afterwards. So these are the topics we're going to cover. We all know that workflow in stroke, as the other speakers alluded to, is fairly complex. There's many branch points, phases of evaluation, management, and opportunities for data collection. The question we ask ourselves is, are we doing everything we can to collect sufficient information at each of these points in order to help us optimize the process as much as possible? And get with the guidelines from this publication by the Calgary group, we noticed that in the thousands of patients in the thrombectomy era that were evaluated, the bottleneck still remained picture to puncture. Most of the hospitals have streamlined the workflow for door to imaging. However, it's everything that happens up to the cath lab phase and even during that is an opportunity for improvement. It's imperative that we optimize these processes at each of these phases because Target Stroke is now going to be recognizing hospitals, assessing hospitals based on quality, especially thrombectomy-capable stroke centers and comprehensives based on their door-to-puncture times and door-to-device times in phase 3. So these are just a handful of the critical data elements that I want to cover from the pre-hospital phase, ER workflow, team communication, a lot of the things that doesn't get talked about or reported, but it's crucial for internal workflow process improvement. So we, this year, revised with all the EMS medical directors throughout the state of Florida, our stroke triage form, especially taking into account the availability of comprehensive and thrombectomy-capable stroke centers and guiding EMS to appropriate triage decisions based on pre-hospital stroke scales. So all of this, again, represents an opportunity for granular data collection, and that's what we're working on at a state level, as I'll get into in a second. In Broward County and Palm Beach and North Miami-Dade, we use the race scale, and it essentially has helped us at least identify in the field which patients ought to go to which center, the most appropriate center the first time, with emphasis on cortical signs. We gave them a helping hand by availability 24/7 of neurointerventional expertise in order to make guided decisions, increase their confidence level, because all of this is relatively new to them. In the hospital, and this is where the data collection begins, is we document everything that we're receiving from EMS, specifically the score, the cortical signs, the presence, absence of blood thinners. Everything goes into a process improvement tool. We're now working on digitizing many of these forms so that it makes it easier for data collection and hopefully part of the future SVIN registry. So here I just want to highlight what we collect, the race score, the cortical signs, whether the cath lab team was activated pre-EMS arrival to the hospital versus pre-imaging, post-imaging. And those are really the kinks in the process that has allowed us to optimize the system, as you'll see the impact of pre-imaging versus post-imaging NI activation. So we created this neurointerventional thrombectomy recanalized occlusion parallel workflow, the NITRO process, as we call it, and we put rocket ships on each side to at least denote the urgency of the cohort of patients that we ought to just fly to the cath lab for and collect meaningful data at each phase of evaluation to determine if there is an impact. And so these are the types of patients that we want to take as quickly. They meet the guidelines, and hence time is of essence. Don't waste on unnecessary imaging. And so as soon as we get an EMS stroke alert, the NI and the neurologist are alerted simultaneously, especially if their race score is 5 or higher. If you're using fast TD, whatever it is, have a cutoff where the NI team can be activated, ideally pre-arrival or pre-imaging, so that you can truly institute a parallel process. Upon arrival, go straight to CT, and then CT, CTA, and no time wasted, go straight to the cath lab. So we create a checklist as part of our NITRO workflow in order to collect data for which patients met each of these check marks and which did not, and what was the impact on time to treatment. And so when they arrive to the cath lab, this is where we start collecting the data on the NITRO process, what was the phase of evaluation, the alert, did the patient meet indeed some of the criteria I just listed for NITRO. During the procedure, as some of the other speakers alluded to, the key data points are collected, and there's some future directions that I'll mention. So as soon as a case is done, within 24 hours, our stroke coordinator sends a feedback email to the entire team. And it's a lot of information, but it really allows us to determine what things went right, what things went wrong. And, while memory is still fresh in our minds of each individual case, and then whatever delays are identified goes to case review on a monthly basis. So here are the key things being, the race score, was it supplied by EMS? All of that, again, goes into utilization of EMS stroke alert and feedback. The neurointerventional team alert, contacted pre-imaging, post-imaging, when did the radiologist contact the neurologist, the neurointerventionalist, the metrics, and delays. The stroke coordinator touches base with each of the team members before sending out this email to figure out if there were delays based on our target times for each phase. If anything is exceeded, a delay is identified and response is required from the team members. So with EMS, we used to provide posters, but that was very time consuming. We created a WhatsApp group because in South Florida, we realized, and I think probably true for many of the EMS agencies across the country, they utilize social media, ideally apps like this, where they internally communicate with all their crew members. So we simply, after every stroke that we do, we have now every chief and medical director in the South Florida EMS WhatsApp group, and they love it. They immediately forward the outcome to their medics and provides immediate feedback to them and opportunities for improvement. So I'm going to switch to data analytics. After we collect the trove of data, what do we do with it? And so without actually analyzing the data, interpreting it is meaningless. So if you're going to collect data, use it. And so the EMS stroke alert utilization, race stroke correlation, the door to puncture times, et cetera, is what I'm going to go into. So here's what we supply as a dashboard to EMS on a monthly, quarterly basis. So we have 8 agencies that serve our region, our healthcare system. So it's like game mechanics. We want to provide regular feedback to each one as to what coded out as a stroke in hospital. Did we have an EMS stroke alert for that patient? If we did not, why not? Was there a race score supplied? And that gives EMS some useful information to work with. They can go back through their EPCRs, look at those cases, and give us a response as to why a stroke alert was not called. Then the analysis of correlation of race score with LVO. So this was presented at ISC last year, but just mainly to show that with the data that we're collecting, we have one of the largest now prospective cohorts on race, correlating the presence of absence of LVO on CTA and angio findings. And so it's much more reliable than some of the initial studies that were published. And for the metrics for treatment, you can see here the quarterly analysis of door to needle times. It's kind of like the Hawthorne effect. If you're looking at it, you're going to get faster. So in 2012, we're giving TPA a dozen times. As we implemented our nitro workflow and parallel process, each of these quarters, we had tremendous improvement in door to needle times, now consistently less than 25 minutes. So as you improve the TPA process, inherently the bridging process also improves to cath lab. And so any patient that simultaneously receives TPA and thrombectomy, we've seen significant improvement in door to puncture times and noticing that TPA does not delay the process. So now in 2018, 2019, D2P times being less than consistently 60 minutes despite having to receive TPA in the ER. So what's the impact of pre-imaging versus post-imaging NI notification and cath lab alert? So you can see that in the blue bars, the NI, if they're notified and cath lab activated pre-imaging, we can consistently get door to puncture in less than 60 minutes. If it's post-imaging, then 65 minutes. We have to determine what these bottlenecks are, because if the guidelines from AHASA, SVIN, SNIS is 30, 60, 90, what will allow us to be less than 60 minutes? What will cause us to be greater than 60 minutes? And this is to show their workflow in a community healthcare system, non-academic, no fellows, no residents, you can still achieve a puncture time less than 60 minutes. So how about the impact of work hours versus after hours, pre-imaging versus post-imaging stratified? So you can see that during work hours, that's when teams are in-house, the puncture times to treatments are the fastest, but in after hours, as long as the NI is alerted pre-imaging based on suspicion for LVO, if the cortical signs are present, race score is high, and activating the team pre-imaging, you can still have a D2P less than 60 minutes. How about reproducibility? Are we an outlier? So we looked at our comprehensive and our thrombectomy stroke center, implementing the nitro process at both sites and still attaining a workflow with D2P less than 60 minutes. We look at operator level delays. So each of these line graphs is a case done by individual operators on a monthly basis. And it essentially shows that at each phase of the stroke process, from arrival to reperfusion, if we see any significant upslopes, that's an opportunity for improvement. So visually, it allows us to quickly identify where the bottlenecks might be, what to avoid in the future. So using our data collection efforts, we educated all the hospitals in the Tri-County, South Florida, created an EMS Stroke Coalition. You can see here in the Tri-Counties, and this is the future of stroke care probably all over the country, there's going to be numerous stroke hospitals claiming to provide mechanical thrombectomy, but not all of them are going to be up to speed. So only the ones that are highlighted in red across these 24, 25 hospitals in the Tri-County are truly Joint Commission certified comprehensives. It is absolutely unbelievable. It's the wild, wild west. So what we did is we reached out to EMS and we said, let's give you the data so you can make informed triage decisions similar to the data we've collected in our system. So utilizing that, we, in collaboration with the University of Miami, we created these regional dashboards which benchmarks one hospital versus another for door-to-needle, door-to-puncture, MRS outcomes, symptomatic ICH, and allows them to essentially understand the quality of care. So we truly feel that that should be a model that could be utilized throughout the country as the stroke landscape continues to evolve and these centers continue to proliferate. So future directions, EMS to cath lab as well as intra-cath lab, apps like Rapid, Viz AI, using data analytics, what I just mentioned to you, hopefully we can automate majority, 99% of that process so as to minimize the grunt work of the stroke coordinators and the analysts and allow us to focus on clinical care and continuous process improvement. There's a lot of promise within the cath lab. Instead of just shouting out times to the nurses, having them document on a paper form, using apps and Apple Watch and Siri and having AI automatically generate some of these metrics would be pretty incredible. And I think we're on the cusp of doing so. Thank you very much.